My pleasure to introduce to you today Amanda Rush. She's here from Augusta, Georgia. And Amanda is truly a web accessibility expert because she lives it every day of her life. And today she owns a consultancy and works with clients. And I love the tagline that they use that says, they make a better web for everybody. And the time is Amanda's. Thank you.
Okay, guys, so first I'm going to ask you to bear with me because this is actually not my computer. I have totally excelled at the demo fail. There will be a few hiccups just because this isn't my system. And secondly, I don't have slides because I have demos. So what I'm going to do, because I'm actually using somebody else's system, is at the end of this, I'm going to give you a couple of URLs, actually a few URLs to write down, because there's a lot of material to cover. I've got about 20 years or so worth of history to try and cover in 20 minutes. So this is not going to be like a very in-depth talk about the accessibility API. But I think that this talk is important because you're going to hear a lot of ranting from those of us that do accessibility about using semantic HTML. And that's not just because we want you to get off our lawns and not use JavaScript. That is because this stuff actually really technically does matter because of how browsers work and how assistive technologies like screen readers work with browsers to get the information off of the web and then present that. So a couple of caveats. These demos all focus on screen readers because that is the technology that I use. But this isn't just about screen reader users. This is about accessibility and more particularly inclusive design, which is what I prefer to call it, is about everybody. And it's about whether you are somebody with a disability or whether you're just somebody that is too drunk to be messing with your phone. This is about making the web work for whoever you are, regardless of what device you happen to be using, including assistive devices. So to get started, I'll give a little bit of a historical background. This all started back during the browser wars. Anybody remember the browser wars? Okay, so Netscape lost. And it lost to Internet Explorer. Okay, so once that all sort of happened, once Microsoft declared victory, basically, at this point the web was becoming really, really important to everybody. And screen readers needed a way to communicate what was on websites and then present that information. So specifically, a screen reader is a piece of software that captures what's on the screen and then interprets that in speech, text-to-speech, or Braille, so it can do both. So just real quickly, if you're not familiar with assistive technology, I have some props. All right, so all of us probably drink coffee or something, right? And you can do this two ways. You can have a cup that just sort of, you put your drink in it, but if you put it by your computer and you knock that cup over, bad news bears for everybody. All right, so this is kind of where a piece of assistive technology would come in. So in this case, it's the lid. And the reason that you can use this lid with this cup is because this cup exposes something for the lid to connect to. So think of this as like the API for this lid. Okay, so if you put this lid on this cup, you can then put your cup on your desk, and if you spill it, the catastrophe is not going to be nearly as big of a problem. That's what assistive technology is. It's an intermediary piece of technology that some people with disabilities use, although not everybody, to access what's normally available. So specifically on the web, that's web pages and that's web apps. But in order for that to be accessed by assistive technology, those web apps and web pages need to be taking advantage of the accessibility API. So the first accessibility API was actually developed by Microsoft, and that is Microsoft Active Accessibility. There's also iAccessible 2, which is developed by Mozilla and extends MS Active Accessibility. The initial version of MS Active Accessibility had some limitations. Basically, what it literally did was scrape the screen. So if whatever was available, whatever it was trying to access was available to the video card in the computer, then Microsoft's active accessibility could access that, and consequently so could screen readers. Screen readers at this point were, because this API was in its infancy and screen readers needed to be able to give more information than just a paragraph, or just saying that it's a link, or just saying that it's a button. They need to communicate things like, say, for instance, a button label. What they would do at this point was literally inject into Windows display chain, and I'm going to focus on Windows mostly because that's what a lot of blind people use, is Windows, although there is some Mac usage. But what would happen was literally these screen readers would inject into the video display chain, intercept the information coming to the graphics card, and then interpret that information and try to spit that out. If you took away that ability to scrape the screen, traditional screen readers just wouldn't work, okay? So after this point, once we get to a point about around 2005, these APIs really started to get better, because by this point you had iAccessible 2, which extended on MS Active Accessibility. You had NS Accessibility from Apple. You have Chrome actually uses iAccessible 2, I think. But these are all browser APIs. So in other words, when you're building a web page or you're building a web app as a developer, you are handing information to the browser. The browser is then handing that information off to the screen reader, and the screen reader is then interpreting that. So this deals with there's a long-standing myth in accessibility that is an assumption that on the part of a lot of people, really, that assistive technology can fix websites. That's not true. They don't. What assistive technologies do is essentially passive. They take their cues from the web browser. So whatever you as a developer feed the web browser is what the screen reader is going to get. And you have to make sure that that information is semantic, because these accessibility APIs expose things like role, state, name, and property of these different elements. HTML has implicit, so links have implicit behaviors. This is how screen readers know that they are links. So an anchor tag, for instance, knows that it's a link. The screen reader knows that it's a link, and it then knows how to behave in that particular situation. You could do something like, okay, let's say I want to create a link that looks like a button. You really shouldn't do this, and the reason you shouldn't do this is because links have a particular set of behaviors that go along with them. You could use something like ARIA to override what the accessibility APIs expose, and tell the screen reader, and basically trick a screen reader and say, no, this is really a button, but it's actually a link. But you're telling the screen reader that it's a button, except it's going to behave like a link would. So this is why you actually shouldn't do that. That's not just us being cranky. This stuff really does actually technically matter because of the way that browsers and specifically the accessibility APIs expose and grant behaviors, implicit behaviors to these specific elements like links and buttons and form fields. So the other reason that this is important, that semantic HTML is really important, is because all of these accessibility APIs, so whether it's MS Active Accessibility or iAccessible 2 or NS Accessible, or the latest one from Microsoft is UIA, and it's about to escape me as what that actually stands for. But basically, HTML maps specifically to these APIs. And you can actually visit the W3C. You can actually see how everything is mapped specifically, all of these implicit behaviors that are directly mapped to what the APIs expose to assistive technologies. So if you are using an element incorrectly, or if you are trying to force an element to behave in a way that it's not designed to, according to the spec, that's not going to work so hot with assistive technologies. They're not going to grasp that, because there's what the API exposes, and then there's what you're actually trying to do, which is generally not according to what the API is going to provide and what that already provides. So just as a quick demo, and this is the audio from the screen reader, you're probably not going to be able to hear it too well, but I've left this at the default settings, so I haven't sped this up for speech to my normal speech rate. I've just left it at the default. I'm going to pick on WordPress.com for a minute, and the only reason I'm picking on WordPress.com is because I use the reader a lot, and plus y'all are family, so. I'm going to load my reader real quick. Maybe I am.
List http://www.word navigation. Try again.
Okay.
Navigation toolbar. // P S F C C O M.
That's the screen reader catching up with my typing.
WordPress.com.
Okay, so give me just a minute. I'm going to log in because there's a specific thing that I want to show you on the reader itself.
Navigation blank. Link logs. Blank. Link features. Blank. Link pricing. Link blank. Link website. Outer heading clickable level 1. Link blank. Blank. Link news. Blank. Link support. Outer blank. Link get started. Outer heading level 1 WordPress hours. Banner. Link out of list. Blank. Link news. Blank. Link price. Blank. Link features. Blank. Link odds. Blank. Link website. Out of list heading.
I'm not sure where my login link went.
Navigation landmark list with 6 items. Websites link. Blogs link. Features link. Pricing link. News link. Support link. Out of list with 2 items. Login link. Username or email edit from autocomplete. Blank. Equals. A at S R M. Caps lock on. Caps lock on. Password edit protected. Black star. 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 Star.
So this is actually a feature of screen readers. They will block passwords. They're not meant to speak. That would actually be really bad if they did. So that is actually a feature because it knows that this is programmatically communicated. This is a password field. We don't want you to speak that information. So, for instance, if you're developing a website and you do something like, I'm going to build a custom password field, but I'm not going to add all of those semantics back that I've taken away, then what would actually happen is the screen reader would speak the password. You don't actually want it to do that. So the first best thing is don't create custom password fields. The next best thing is if you are going to do that, add those semantics back, and you can do that using ARIA, which I'll talk about in a minute.
Blank.
Yeah, it looks like it errored. Okay, I need to retype that.
Star. 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 Star.
Oh, that's right, your one key doesn't work. So, all right, that's not going to work.
Circle.
Okay.
Clickable checkbox.
Let's see if I can find a different version of this. Anyway, so the thing that I was going to point out was, you know how when you click on the notification that you get new posts in the reader? When you bring that up with the screen reader, when you bring up WordPress.com with the screen reader, all that happens is it says number of new posts or new posts, but it doesn't communicate any semantic information. So I have no idea what that actually is other than text. I figured out, hey, if I press enter on this, it'll update and it'll give me the new posts, but I did that by experimenting. So I don't have, I still literally have no idea what that even is supposed to be. And the reason that I don't have any idea what that's supposed to be is because there's no semantic information communicated with that new posts notification thing up at the top of the reader. So things like that are why communicating semantics can be important, because it lets you know as a screen reader user what that is. So then you know how to behave. Is this a heading? You know, so that I can navigate back and forth between headings on the page. Is this a list of items like that menu was? Is this a form field so I know that I can type into it? Is this a password field so that I know that if I'm typing into it, my password's not going to be spoken, etc. And those are things that are provided to you as developers via the browser through the accessibility APIs. That's how you get that information.
Button login.
So I'll demonstrate just navigating by headings really quick, so you can see what that looks like. I'll just navigate to the website.
/W U O unknown. Alert customer server.
And I'm just pressing the control key to shut up the speech, because if you don't, it will read everything.
List with one items link skip to content.
So I could use this skip link, which a lot of people with disabilities will do, is even if they don't use screen readers, they'll skip past all the navigation and just skip right to the main content.
Out of list.
But if I'm going to navigate by headings, because I've got specifically some hidden headings in this theme, the screen reader can move.
Main navigation heading level 2.
So to main navigation.
Main content heading level 2.
And it's going to announce that there's a heading here for main content, even though stylistically this is actually hidden.
Helping you create a web for everyone with WordPress with the responsibility come main landmark our journal heading level 2.
If I want to move to lists,
no next
there are
list.
no lists on this page. So, well, there are up at the top, so I'll move
And
up.
landmark main navigation landmark list with 6 items.
And
about
all of
link.
this is communicated through semantic HTML, which is exhibiting these default behaviors that are implicit in these elements.
Out of list with one item skip to content link.
So if you are developing something custom, because we know that this happens, so the ideal is don't develop custom UI elements when you don't have to. In practice, this is actually happens a lot. So if you are developing a custom UI element, or if you've inherited one, or for whatever reason it's in your lap, if that's custom, and if these elements are used incorrectly and you're not presenting the semantic information, then you need to put that back. And you do that by using ARIA. And I'm not going to get into all the technical details of ARIA, because that's several talks in themselves. There are some talks on WordPress TV, actually, that you can watch about ARIA. And they touch on some of the same stuff that I'm discussing in this talk, the role, states, names, and properties of all of these elements. What you're doing with ARIA is you're telling the browser, and by extension the screen reader, okay, this is what this is its role. So if it's a button, this is the behaviors that you need to associate with the button. State for things like checkboxes and radio buttons, properties, etc. This is information that is implicit, in some of these native HTML elements, and that you need to put back when you are creating something custom, because you don't have those semantics. If you have a custom element and you don't have any of that semantic information, what will happen is the screen reader actually will not speak anything at all, because it has nothing to communicate. It just doesn't know anything about that. So if you move through a page, as a matter of fact, this happens a lot with foreign languages, some foreign languages that screen readers don't support. If that's not declared correctly using a lang attribute in your page, then screen readers will not be able to interpret that properly. And what will happen is it will speak in its default language, but it's speaking text that's actually in another language, so that can actually get pretty weird. Or if it can't recognize the language at all, like some Hebrew, Cyrillic, Arabic, etc., it has no idea what those characters are, so it just says nothing. You don't get a blank, you don't get anything, just silence.
Out of list heading.
I'll close that.
Air Media Row 1. Crestron Air Media. Zach LoopConf. Customer servant. Customer servant can. Customer servant can. List with one item. Skip to content.
Yeah, that closed it. Okay, so let's close this because I'm going to actually pull up my notes because what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my actual notes, which are quite extensive, and there's no way that I'd be able to get through everything because there's some URLs that I want to copy into a window for you guys so that you can read. And I would strongly encourage you to read everything here.
Checked selected. Accessibility of his notepad. Blank. How browsers HTML accessibility mappings.
So this first one is HTML accessibility mappings. This is the W3C listing of how all these different HTML elements, all of them, map to the accessibility APIs. And the idea isn't that you should memorize these, but this does serve as a reference, and it will give you an idea of how these are supposed to behave and what the expected behaviors of all of these different elements are. So that when you're using these as developers, even when you're writing your custom elements, you can use ARIA to then go back and add these behaviors back in.
HTTP.
So this one right here, this URL right here, will give you a thorough rundown of how, essentially a step-by-step of how browsers and screen readers interact. And you might actually find that to be an interesting read. It's definitely worth, if you can't afford to or you don't want to download a screen reader to test, or access the one on your Mac, because there actually is one built into your Mac. You can press Command F5 and load VoiceOver, which is the Apple screen reader. This will give you a quick rundown of how screen readers interact with the browser in detail. Yes, I'm going to post it. I'm totally going to post this. There's probably not enough time to go into the whole story as to why this is not posted, and you guys are essentially getting a completely different talk than the talk I had written in October. But it's quite a long story. So, and I thank you for your patience on this, because this is definitely not how I plan to do this at all. The final resource in this text file is an article that goes through all of the history of all of the accessibility APIs in detail, and it goes through why this matters to developers. And basically, it matters because you're not supposed to make people's lives harder if you want them to create accessible stuff. This needs to be as easy as possible. There needs to not be an easy way to fail at this. And the best way to do that is to get the commercial screen readers, which is something that takes a talk in and of itself, because a lot of the commercial screen readers still screen scrape, which means they grab the information directly from the display chain. And versus something like NVDA, which is an open source screen reader, relies on the accessibility APIs as much as it possibly can. instead of, and it screen scrapes only when it has to, for things like math, which is not supported by any of the browsers. So, but the idea is that we should not be asking developers to test against all of these different screen reader browser combinations, because each screen reader and each browser, each screen reader is hard-coded to work specifically with a specific browser. So for instance, JAWS for Windows, which is they market it as the best-in-class screen reader. It's also the most popular screen reader, is hard-coded to work best with Internet Explorer. If you throw Firefox at it, it'll work, but you're still going to get a better experience in Internet Explorer. Right? We all hate Internet Explorer, but that's just the way it is. NVDA, on the other hand, is hard-coded to work best with Firefox. It will work with Internet Explorer, but it works best with Firefox. ChromeVox, which is another screen reader, and that's all it does is screen scrape, is hard-coded to work best with Chrome. There is an effort at the W3C to create some interoperability between these APIs, because these are all proprietary. So each browser's got its own API, and they're trying to be compatible with each other, but not exactly. So there is an effort at the W3C to start some interoperability between these APIs and these browsers, so that we're not dealing with cross-screen reader compatibility plus cross-browser compatibility plus whatever else. To make things accessible. That effort has not succeeded yet. So until that does, we're still in a position where each browser vendor has its own accessibility API and browser, etc. So we still have to deal with cross-screen reader compatibility. Now the thing is, as developers, you're not going to get a situation where everything works perfectly with every screen reader and every browser combination. You're going to get different results from each one. Because, for instance, the screen readers that still grab things from the display chain, they're going to present different behaviors than a screen reader that just works with what is exposed through its particular accessibility API. Because it's literally grabbing from the document object model, which gets into JavaScript, which is why a lot of us are saying, if you're going to learn JavaScript deeply, by all means do this, but learn accessibility deeply too, because you're now in a position where you can modify the document object model, which means you're in a situation where you've got a lot of power and a lot of responsibility. So if you're going to learn JavaScript deeply, and you should, make sure that you learn accessibility deeply as well, and make sure that you're using semantic HTML so that you can take advantage of these implicit behaviors from these accessibility APIs. How much time do I have left? Okay, so once again, I'd like to thank all of you guys for putting up with all of these technical difficulties, and thanks for your patience. And I will definitely be posting these, definitely these URLs, because this is not, I wrote this, copied this content down, but these are articles that were written by others. So I will definitely be posting the URLs. I'll post them on Twitter. I'll post them on my own website as well, but I'll definitely shoot them out on Twitter. If you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter at CSWordPress. I'm always pretty active over there, so if there's anything that you want to ask, and I guess if there's time at the end of this talk, you can also ask questions as well, and you can also catch me the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Amanda.